Well, one of the new programs that you're hearing daily now, weekdays on the Dove Radio at 2 o'clock, is a live call-in show produced by Focus on the Family. It's called Everyday Relationships. And hosting that show is Dr. Greg Smalley along with Susie Larson. We had Susie on the other day, but today we're delighted to have the man himself, Dr. Greg Smalley, with us. Hi, Greg. How you doing?
Hey, it's great to be here. I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, thank you, and thanks for the program. You guys are touching a lot of nerves out there with all the topics you're carrying.
I tell you what, it's so much fun. You know, we start every show talking about the greatest commandment, so to love God, to love others as you love yourself, and we really think, you know, when you think about relationships, God, others, and self, man, that's about it. So if we can just figure out how to do those three well, then I think that we're living out that greatest commandment. So it's kind of unfair to start your show with the greatest commandment. It's kind of cheating, but we figured why not?
Well, you know, of all the topics you could deal with in counseling and the things that you've been trained in, schooled in, relationships touches everybody almost at every level.
Absolutely. You know, because one, I mean, this is how we were created. We are created to be in relationship, and that's a part of our DNA. We all want to do that. We want to do that well, but that's where Satan's going to attack us. You know, I think about, you know, even some of the ministries that I've been involved in over the years. You know what? It's not usually the external threats that get us into trouble. It's that we implode. You know, the conflict within the ministry, that within our relationships. That's usually where it goes wrong. I mean, you think of churches, and that's why we're just so passionate to go, you know, let's just be real. I mean, the thing that I wanted more than anything, and Susie and I talked a lot about this, is that let's be honest, let's be real. I'm going to tell, man, I blew it. My 16-year-old daughter last night, she was so frustrated with me as we're just laying in bed trying to work through something. I mean, it's messy. Relationships are messy. Why can't we have somewhere where we don't have to put on the mask, we don't have to pretend everything's so hunky-dory? Why can't we just talk about relationships and use story and figure out how do we do these better?
You know what's so interesting in this high-tech world in which we live, Greg? It's amazing. We're texting every second of the day, it seems like, or taking an email or something. So we're in contact with somebody, and yet the number one feeling out there in America is loneliness. How in the world can you draw a line between the two there?
I'm sorry, I wasn't listening. I was texting. Now, what did you say? Just kidding. You know, it is. Because, one, I mean, I don't think that's real connection. Just because we're holding a smartphone and we're texting, you know, 15,000 times a day, that's not real connection. As a matter of fact, you know, I believe that our younger generation, one of the things that really concerns me relationally for them is that, you know, we know communication-wise that words represent only about 7% of the communication of the message. You know, the body language, tone, I mean, all that factors in more. But yet you think about Facebook and social media and texting, we put such a huge emphasis on words. And, you know, Ecclesiastes 7:21 says, don't pay attention to every word that someone says. And I really do think that that's part of the challenge is how do we teach people, you know, to not depend upon that stuff. Let's get back to learning how to really relate differently, because you're right, loneliness is a huge problem. I think, as a matter of fact, my opinion is that loneliness is the worst of all human emotions to experience, because it's exactly opposite of how God created us. He wants us in relationship, not feeling lonely.
Are we expecting too much in perfection in the way of communication?
You know, I think that we expect too much out of words, and, you know, 70% of all communication is miscommunication. I think that most people, we don't think about that. We hear something, we instantly draw the conclusion, we believe we're right. I accurately understood what was just being said, whereas, you know, part of what we try to do on the show is keep reminding people, no, you know, your expectations should be that everything you hear, you've probably misunderstood it. Thus, you need to seek that out. You need to ask. You need to clarify. And I think when we do that, then we stand a much better chance. But the reality is, yeah, when my wife's talking, I mean, I've got my own stuff going on. I'm hearing her through my filter, and that's not great communication. But yet we all do it.
Yeah.
All right, so let's just be honest and let's talk about how do we do that better. And that's what we want from the show.
Let me just say to our viewers and listeners again, Dr. Greg Smalley is the co-host of a program called Everyday Relationships, and it's heard weekdays at 2 o'clock live on the Dove Radio. All right, Greg, you've authored a book called Fight Your Way to a Better Marriage, How Healthy Conflict can take you to deeper levels of intimacy, and pretty powerful book. How much is your life in here?
Oh, my goodness, a whole bunch. Because I think if nothing else, I learned a ton from my father, Gary Smalley. One of the things is that how transparent he is. And I'm drawn to his stories. I've heard them a billion times, but yet I still, to this day, when he starts to tell one of the stories, I'm just drawn. I think it makes me feel safer when I know that, hey, he's not perfect either. And so that's what we try to do, even on this radio program every day, we're telling a different story from our own life. But, in terms of conflict, for me, I was always afraid of conflict, didn't want to rock the boat. I just thought that if you fight, it's going to go in a bad place, and I didn't want that. And sadly, I didn't really understand the true power of conflict. Conflict, and let me say that differently, healthy conflict is the doorway to intimacy and deeper connection. In other words, if my wife Erin and I choose to walk through conflict and learn to do that in a good way, boy, this is where I learn more about her. I understand her more, what she needs, what she wants, how she's feeling. There's so much that I can use from conflict. One of my very favorite stories is 2 weeks into our marriage. We were just laying in bed, and Erin said, "Hey, I've been meaning to ask you, how am I doing as a wife?" Now, there's probably a lot that I should have said. Unfortunately, I went with fine, and I didn't know that women hate that word. As a matter of fact, she explained that fine really stands for feelings inside not expressed. And so she's a nurse, and so she circled back on this thought and said, all right, well, let me ask it this way, 0 to 10. 10, the best job I'm doing as a wife, 0, the worst. How would you rate me?
Oh.
So, like an idiot.
Well, that was a no-win situation.
No. It should have been so simple, but I actually thought about this, and I thought I came with the perfect number. I ended up rating her a 9.3. Like, it makes no sense.
Oh, no.
Where the 0.3 came from. I mean, I should have said a 1. It would have been the same net effect.
Yeah.
But tell you what, boy, instantly we were in conflict. She's crying. I'm defending myself. To the point, though, that what I walked away from, and what I think we both took away later on, and this is the value of conflict, okay, is that I learned, I didn't know that my wife grew up in a real perfectionistic home, so nothing she ever did ever felt good enough, and she never measured up. As a matter of fact, she graduated high school with a 4.3 GPA. I mean, when I first heard that, I thought she was making that up.
Wow.
I didn't think it was possible. She's
Wow.
like, oh, no, you can take honors classes. I was like, well, no one invited me into an honors class. But on her graduation day, 1,000 students, she graduated number 3 in her class. And her mom, who's a dear woman, loves the Lord, came up next to her and said, honey, I'm so proud of you. Now imagine if you just had applied yourself a little bit more, you could have been number 1.
Oh.
Never meant it the way that came across. So I'm not slamming my mother-in-law. I love her. But that's the kind of thing. So here my wife kind of grew up never feeling good enough. Here she wanted her husband, after 2 weeks, to validate her, to show her that she measures up. And I didn't get it. I learned that day that when I make mistakes, that it pushes kind of a button in me that I call failure. I feel like a failure. So, I mean, seriously, Erin and I, from that experience, we dealt with it, we handled it, and we both learned something that day. That's the power of conflict. If we just learn how to manage it. So really that whole book is just really given some clear ways to kind of walk through that doorway of conflict to the deepest levels of intimacy. I'm telling you, it's possible. You
have a lot of practical tips in here, too, and how to identify feelings and people. And let me just encourage folks to check it out. It's called Fight Your Way to a Better Marriage by Dr. Greg Smalley, put out by Focus on the Family. And you may want to check it out at Evangel and or Christian Discount Books, or even online at Amazon or Barnes & Noble. One other question. I know you're on a real tight schedule, and I want to respect that. What is the main issue behind a fight?
It really comes down to this, that we all have buttons. I mean, you know the expression, oh, he pushed my button, she hit my button. You know, buttons mean just their deeper emotions. We all have sort of these sensitive emotions that are buried kind of deep that they get triggered when someone says or does something. And so, like that night when we were in conflict, see, my failure button got triggered. Aaron's invalidated, don't measure up button got triggered. And I think the greatest thing that we've learned in handling and managing our conflicts is you first need to understand, well, what button just got pushed? Because, see, when your buttons get pushed, your heart closes instantly. It's like that little roly-poly bug. And then you react to each other. You might say things, argue, get angry, or you might, withdraw and move away and shut down. But the bottom line is when those buttons get pushed, that's the real issue. It's not money. It's not talking about the kids. It's not it's not the topic. It's the fact that you just got a button pushed. Now your heart's closed. Now you're reacting. That's pushing their button, and you get spinning in the cycle. That's what we try to help people to understand what the real issue is. Because when you can deal with the real issue, then you can learn how to deal with conflict better. And that's, we don't do it perfectly. But I tell you, Aaron and I now know what to do eventually. So even if we don't handle it right, last night with my daughter, I didn't handle this right. She pushed my buttons, and I reacted to her. But, later on, I was able to deal with me and kind of get my heart back open. And then my daughter, Murphy, and I had a good, productive conversation. So, I've been teaching it forever. It doesn't work perfect, but I know what to do eventually. That's the difference.
All right. Thank you, Greg. And again, I want to say to our viewers and listeners, you can hear Greg live with Susie every weekday at 2 o'clock on the Dove Radio. And Everyday Relationships, produced by Focus on the Family. Thanks for what you do. Thanks for committing to this, because I know doing an hourly show every day is a big commitment to your schedule and to your life, but the impact is phenomenal. So thanks for what you and Susie do.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Yeah, I had no idea. They sort of lied to me about how hard this would be. But I tell you what, I love it because we get to talk about real stuff. So, call in, ask questions. We'd love to talk about whatever relationship issue you might have.
You guys are very transparent with your lives. I commend you on that.
Well, God keeps blessing me with story after story after story. So I wish he'd quit, but I'll just go ahead and share them.
Okay.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on.
All right, thanks, Greg. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Dr. Greg Smalley with us today. Again, you can hear Everyday Relationships live at 2 o'clock during the Dove, on the Dove Radio. Every afternoon, it's live from Focus on the Family, so be sure to check it out. I think you'll find it to be a very great resource in your life. All right, we'll be right back here on Focus Today.